All right, good evening, everyone. Daf Yomi for the month is sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Moshe and Susie Feder, Le'ili Nishmas, Mrs. Feder's father, Simcha Ari ben Yosef Tzvi, whose yortzeit was on the 17th of Iyar. Thursday's daf, which is today's daf, is sponsored by Mr. Loiterman, my father. Le'ili Nishmas, Rabbi Loiterman's maternal grandmother, Basha Bas Mordechai Avraham HaKohen, whose yortzeit was on the 4th of Sivan, and today's daf is also sponsored by Shmuli and Miriam Fuchs, Shmuli's mother, Bailey Yentel Bas El Chanan. And also remind everybody that Tikkun Leil Shevuos at Kahal Yereim is on. It's on, it's happening, it's a thing. And so, after you finished your Yontif Suda, then come on back to the Kahal Yereim base medrash, where you can hear a shiur from me at midnight until 12:45. Nasa v'nishma, the secret formula. I can't wait to hear what it's all about. And then we have 1 o'clock to 1:45. Do you win the Inner War with a Carrot or Stick by Rav Avraham Jacks? And I will give Daf Yomi as well. And then a 2 to 2:45. Rus, the Twisted Road to Redemption, and how to navigate it. So that's important if you're interested in roads to redemptions. That's the one to find out about. And then that 2:45, get home, take a nap, come back for davening at
9:45.
9:45.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah.
So that's good. It's
Yeah.
enough time to get good shluff in before davening.
Yep.
Okay, we are at Mesve, which is 5 lines up from the bottom on Chavav Amud Beis. And we were talking yesterday about a statement that Shmuel made. Shmuel had said that if you make an oath and you don't speak it out, it doesn't count, right? And then we had a question on that. We specified that, no, that's accurate. If you don't speak it out at all, then we had certain circumstances where you thought something different than what you said, and that was what different things counted. Now we're going to ask another question on this statement of Shmuel. Motzis vasecha tishmor, right? You should guard that which comes out of your mouth, vasisa, and you should do it, whatever your mouth states. Ainli ela shehotzi bisvasav. That means that an oath only seems to apply if you utter it. Gamar belibo minayin. How do I know that an oath also applies if I think it? Talmud Lomar, Kol Nediv Lev. The pasuk talks about donating to the Mishkan, and it says anybody who wanted to give in his heart. And that counts. So this is a question on Shmuel, because Shmuel said that thinking in your mind is not enough. So Shani Halsam, that's different over there. Dichsiv Kol Nediv Lev. By giving to the Mishkan, that is a different story. If you give to the Mishkan, you're right. Then you can think in your mind and it can become included. However, normally a shvuah has to be spoken out outright. V'nigmar mina. So why don't we learn from there? Why don't we say that this is the rule now for all shvuos? That just like if you want to curse something hektish, you could do it in your mind. So too, I also would be able to make any oath, anything prohibited to myself by thinking it in the mind. The answer is mishum dahavu truma ukadshim shnei ksuvim habayin ke'echad, because we have what's called a shnei ksuvim habayin ke'echad rule. Shnei ksuvim habayin ke'echad means that if the Torah wants to teach me a general rule, it only needs to tell me this idea one time. If it tells me that once, I apply it in all similar circumstances. Right? That's like that's the right, a binyan av. That's what we call that. So if I learn some rule one time, anytime I have a circumstance, if there was one time in the Torah that it talked about an oath, that it said about that oath that you could think about it in your mind, I would presume that that is the case by all oaths. However, if the Torah has 2 different circumstances and specifies the same rule twice, once in each of those circumstances, the Torah is doing that because it only applies in those 2 cases and no other cases. Because if it had applied in all cases, then why would it bother telling it to me a second time? One time would have been sufficient. The fact that it repeats itself a second time has to be telling me something, and it's telling me that it only applies in those 2 cases. That's called shnei ksuvim habayin ke'echad. And in this circumstance, this is how it works. When it comes to truma, if somebody wants to designate truma, if he has thought about declaring something truma, that counts. So too, if he wants to declare something hektish, belonging to the Beis HaMikdash, thinking about it counts. So since that rule applies in those 2 circumstances, we know that it does not apply in the case of any other Shevuos. So this is according to the opinion that holds that if it's written twice in the Torah, we cannot learn it. Okay, well, That's fine according to that opinion, right? That was one perspective that says that that if it's written twice, we don't learn from there. But there is an opinion that holds that even if it's written twice, we still learn it from there to other places. So, Michael Maimer, how are you going to explain why it is that we don't learn from these two circumstances that thinking it is sufficient? So, havu chulin v'kodshim v'chulin mikodshim lo gamrin. And the answer is the case of kodshim is not, you can't learn from kodshim over to non-kodshim rules. Kodshim has its, like we've discussed a few times, kodshim is a section of learning that has its own rules of derivations. It has its own rule. You can't say that just because a rule applies in the case of holy objects, that rule also applies in non-holy objects. That's not the case. Okay, so if we don't learn from Hektish over to and from Truma over to other oaths, you are just in time. We are turning the page to Chaf Zayin Amud Aleph Mishnah, brand new, right at the top of the page. Okay, so we're ready to go with this new, brand new Mishnah.
Now.
All right, now we're ready to go. Nishba levatel es ha-mitzvah velo bitel. Let's say he takes an oath and he decides that he's going to nullify the performance of a mitzvah, right? I'm not going to do a mitzvah. And then he doesn't nullify. He does it anyway. He says, I'm not going to put on tefillin, and then he puts on tefillin anyway. Pater, he's exempt. That oath does not count. You cannot swear to not perform a mitzvah, as we've learned a few times.
You don't swear to do a mitzvah.
Lekayim velokiyim. If he swears to do a mitzvah and he doesn't do it, also pater. That does not count either. That oath is not valid.
What's the reason for that?
Shahaya bedin shehei chayev, because you might have thought it should be logical that you should be required k'div Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, as you, this our Rabbi Yehuda is also suggesting that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, he's in tune with Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Here's what Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira said. I'm Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Ma'im harishus. Look, if you take a look at a regular oath, I will drink water, for example, right? She'eno mushba alav me Har Sinai. There's no oath about, there's no requirement to keep that from Har Sinai. Harei hu chayev alav. And if you do not do what you say you're supposed to do, you're liable for that oath, right? You're supposed to keep what you say. Mitzvah, then why should it not be if there's a mitzvah shehu mushbal in Har Sinai, which you are supposed to keep it because Har Sinai, because Hashem said from Har Sinai that you're supposed to. Eino din sheyehei chayev aleha. So then for sure you should be liable if you don't do it. That's our Yehuda's logic, right? Right, that sounds exactly like what you're thinking, right? So for sure there should be all the more reasons. If I say that I'm going to wear a hat tomorrow, then that's great. I have to keep that. But if I swear I'm going to put on tefillin, for sure I have to put on tefillin, because not only do I have to keep an oath, but then Hashem told me to do that too. So why shouldn't I be obligated to keep that? So Amru lo. So they answered Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, lo. It's not really, you can't compare the two. Im amart b'Shevuos harishus shekain asa b'lav gehein. Remember that there's a technical aspect when it comes to Shevuos bitui. You need to be able to swear in the positive and the negative. So when it comes to rishus, that works. I will drink water, I won't drink water. Tomar b'Shevuos mitzvah, you can't do that when it comes to taking an oath of a mitzvah. Shelo asa b'lav gehein. Right? You can't be the positive and the negative. Because let's say he says, I'm going to put on tefillin, he can't swear the opposite, I'm not going to put on tefillin. Because not putting on tefillin would be to nullify the mitzvah, and that doesn't count. So therefore, it falls into our old technical category of not having both the positive and the negative category, and without the positive and the negative, it does not count. Says the Gemara. Tanarabanon, our rabbis learned, Yachol nishba levatel es mitzvah. You might have thought that if I swear to nullify a mitzvah velo bitel and I don't nullify it, yehei chayev, that I would be liable. Talmud lomar. Therefore, the pasuk says lahara o laheitiv. It has to be for bad or for good. Now, we derive that lahara laheitiv means for rishus, not for mitzvah. So the question that we're asking is, Ma hatava rishus, af hara rishus. So just like the good thing that you're swearing to do must be not a mitzvah, but a good idea, a good act, like eat healthy, right? That's a positive.
Rishus means permission, right?
Permissible act, right? It's not a required act, it's a permissible act. So too, the negative that you swear also be to avoid a bad thing to do, right? I will not eat bad foods, right? Okay, so now, Otzi Nishma Levatel Mitzvah, that's going to exclude that if I swear to nullify a mitzvah, velo bitel, and I don't do it, shehu pater, that is exempt. Okay, now, Yochol Nishba Lekaimis a mitzvah, we might have thought that if you swear to upkeep a mitzvah, velo kiyam, and you don't do it, sheyeh chayav, that you be liable. Talmud lomar, therefore the pasuk says lahara o leheitev, it has to be for good or for bad. Mahara o rishus, just like the negative thing that you're swearing is a permissible item. I will not eat chocolate cake. Afatova rishus, so too, the good thing that you do has to be an oath to a rishus. So therefore, otzi nishba lekayim es mitzvah. Therefore, if I swear to perform a mitzvah, it does not count because I'm swearing to do an actual mitzvah, not swearing to do a rishus. Velo kiyim. So if I don't do it, shu pater, you're exempt. Yachol nishba lehara la'atzmo velo hera yachol yehei pater. You might think, right, that if he swears in order to cause harm to himself, so you might think that he'd be exempt, right? So I'm just gonna, I don't know, whatever he.
Suicidal harm.
I don't know about suicidal harm because that's like, then it doesn't matter, right? Because he's dead
Beyond
already,
harm.
right? That's beyond harm. But let's, I don't know. Let's say he swears that he's going to, I don't know, give a piercing or something, I don't know, something like that, right? So you might think that I'd be exempt, Talmud lomar, therefore it says laharo leheitev, it's for good or for bad, ma tov rishus af hara rishus, just like the good thing that you do has to be permissible, also the bad thing you do is a permissible act. I guess maybe a piercing may not be as good thing because it might not be liable. Let's say for women it's for sure okay, so it would be a woman case, right?
Cut here.
Okay, a cut, right? So avi nishba lahara la'atzmo v'lo hara b'rshus biyado. So therefore, I'm going to include also somebody who swears to do something which is bad for himself, right? Let's say he's going to eat fatty foods or something, right? So he swears not to do that. So that counts, even though it's bad for you. Why? Because it's a rishus. That's what we're including in this pasuk. Yachol nishba lahara la'achirim. You might think, let's say I swear to do bad things to other people. Right, I'm going to punch somebody. V'lo heiran, you don't do it. Sheyeh chayav, that you might be liable. Talmud lomar, therefore the pasuk says lehara o leheitev, it has to be for bad or for good. Ma tava rishus, just like the good thing has to be permissible. Af hara rishus, so too the bad thing you're swearing to do has to be permissible. Otzi nishba lehara lachirim, so that's going to exclude me causing harm to another person. V'lo haran, then I don't do it. That's not going to be an oath because she'ein harishus biyado, because you have no permission to do that. You're not allowed to harm another person. So therefore, that's not going to be allowed. How about, let's say I decide I want to do a good thing to another person. Like, I'd like to give this guy a nice present. Okay? So how do I know? So that does work. Talmud lomar, o leheitev, right? The pasuk says, or if you want to do something good. So what's an example of doing bad to another person? Akes ploni ve'eftas mocho. I'm going to hit so-and-so and smash his head. Right? That would be an example of a bad thing to do. Umimai. So now, all this back and forth that we basically went back and forth didn't teach us anything brand new that we didn't know. But the point is that all the positives and all the negatives have to be dealing with circumstances of rishus. And the interesting thing of this brisa is that what's the derivation? The derivation is, since the positive is a rishus, therefore the negative has to be rishus. And then we went the other way. Since the negative has to be rishus, therefore the positive has to be rishus. So the one thing that's a little bit circular about the logic is we never come to a proof as to why they both have to be rishus cases. Right? We just say, because this one's rishus, the other one has to be rishus. Okay, but where's the starting point? What makes one a rishus versus the other? So therefore, that's our next question. How do you know hatava ola hara is talking about a good thing or a bad thing, which are rishus, right? We said it's not a mitzvah. It's not an aveira. It's not something I can't do to somebody else. Okay, so that's all based on the idea that the good and the bad that you're swearing to do has to be a rishus. How do I know it has to be a rishus? Dilma b'davar mitzvah ksivi. Maybe the pasuk means lahara means to do an aveira, and ledhatava means to leitev means to do a mitzvah. Lo salka daitach. Don't think that. Why? Because The pasuk says lahara ulahitev, which means that the good and the bad have to be the same equivalence. The good and the bad have to be the same equivalence. So therefore, you need to have good similar to bad, v'hara dumya hatava, and the bad similar to the good. De'akish hara l'hatava. So the bad is made as a hekish. That's when two things are written next to each other, and we equate the two. So now, how does that prove that it's rishus? Mahatava eina bebitul mitzvah, just like the positive oath can't mean to nullify a mitzvah. I can't swear to nullify a mitzvah because that's bad for me. To nullify, I swear I will not, right? I can't. So afhara eina bebitul mitzvah. So to my negative can't be to nullify a mitzvah. So therefore, my good can't, just like I can't for the positive. So therefore, just like a positive, it can't be a positive to what would be an example of a positive to not do a mitzvah, right? I swear that I will eat chametz, right? I'm not allowed to eat chametz, but my positive can't be to nullify, because that in its essence is bad for me. So therefore, also, I can't take an oath negative. I will not eat matzah, because that also wouldn't be, even though that is a bad thing, but that wouldn't be equivalent. That would be equivalent to swearing to do an aveira, which I can't do. So therefore, I can't. The positive can't be bad for me. Therefore, the negative has to be in the same category. The negative can't be for a mitzvah. So hara gufa hatavahi. The akish hatav. So the 1 second. Hara ena bebitul mitzvah. So hara. Gufa hatavahi. So that bad, right, that he's doing bad for him is bad for himself. Right? That which I will not eat, right? If he swears negative, I will not eat matzah, that can't work because that's bad for his body because he's not eating it. And even though, this is hara atzma shemera, he's bad for his body, right? Because he's not eating it. If that's good for his nefesh, he's good for his neshama.
Is this talking about for Pesach?
Yes, that's why we're talking about matzah and chametz, right? So that's for our for example, right? So therefore, right, pasuk says, therefore it can't be that I'm going to not, the bad thing is that I will do something bad by not eating it, right? Even though that's good for my neshama to do that. That I can't do because we already had lahatava to do good for myself, and we said that can't be a mitzvah. So therefore, this concept of ra to not do a mitzvah can't work. Now, on the other side, vakish hatava la, we're going to compare the good to the bad. Mahara ena bekiyu mitzvah, just like bad can't be to the negative, can't be to not keep a mitzvah, right? For example, he swears, I will not eat chametz. Right? If he swears, I will not eat chametz, so that's a negative, right? Something he's going to refrain, he's going to keep his body from doing. However, by doing so, that would be positive, because he'd be not eating chametz, which is a good thing. So then that doesn't make sense. That can't be hara. You can't call that bad if a good thing comes out of it. So therefore, that can't be a mitzvah. Right? You can't, the negative can't be for the sake of a mitzvah, because I swear to do a negative, and the negative thing that I'm doing is actually a good thing, then that can't be called bad. So that doesn't make sense. So therefore, af hatava. So therefore, when we're also talking about the positive, eina bekiyu mitzvah, that can't be to keep a mitzvah. I can't swear to eat matzah, despite the fact that eating matzah is a good thing, and I'm eating it. But it can't be because the parallel of I won't eat chametz can't work. So therefore, gufa harahi, that is going to be hatava gufa harahi. That good itself, right? Because he's eating it, is going to be bad because he is eating he's eating chametz on Pesach. That's going to be bad. So that happens. That's not going to work. So that can't be done at all either, right? So therefore, it is not usher to say correct, because if it's not usher as a shvua, right? If I swear against a mitzvah or I swear for a mitzvah, it's not going to work.
What about in the case of someone, I feel like this happens quite often, on Shabbos afternoon, just before Shabbos, you're like, I'm not going to watch.
Right, yeah. So make sure you say B'li Neder. Right? That's our takeaway from our Gemara. Right?
Exactly. like are you over by saying I'm?
That might not be a shvua, right? Even though I swear I'm not going to wash, right? A person says that might not work, right? Because if you swear that you're not going to do a mitzvah, that might not work, right? The shvua might not count. Okay, so now we've just established that the good and the bad, right? I'm just going to grab a tissue. The good and the bad can't be mitzvos, right? That's essentially what we went back and forth. The good and the bad can't work as a mitzvah. So therefore, since it was impossible to explain hara o lahatava as a mitzvah, so we said that means that the good thing that you're swearing to do, meaning the positive thing, has to be a rishus. I will eat chocolate cake, right? Because by eating chocolate cake, it's not the same thing as I will eat chametz, because I'm not violating an avera by doing it. It can't be called bad, okay? I'm eating chocolate cake. It's rishus. I won't eat broccoli, right? So that's bad. It's the negative. I won't do something, and it's healthy for me, but I won't do it, okay? That's not the same thing as I won't eat matzah, which is bad for, or I won't do an avera, which by saying I won't do the avera, that's actually good for me. So therefore, you see how the rishus, with rishus, it seems to work better. Right? That's the idea of it. So now, nevertheless, if you really look at Rishus Nami Lo Mishkachas Law, you really could argue the same way by Rishus, because when I say I'm going to eat chocolate cake, it is positive for my taste buds that I want the chocolate cake, but it's not healthy for me. So how can you call that good? If your whole logic is, I can't swear to eat chametz because while it's good for my taste buds, I'm eating chametz, it's a bad thing for my neshama to do it. So why can't we say the same thing about swearing to eat chocolate cake? There's a good element, but there's also a bad element to it. So your logic is going to apply. You apply the same logic. You can't say it's entirely good either.
Well, you want to chocolate cake, if it's a happy davening, you can't eat it.
Sorry?
If you have your kavanah with your kavanah for davening.
Yeah, but you so could a healthy breakfast, right? So this I have to explain this to the little kids, right? They come to school and like I was hungry, so I was eating a donut. I hear you, but it's what you're eating as well, right? It's not just that you're eating. So the answer is okay. So that's a fair point. Ella. So rather, how are we going to prove that we're talking about Shevuos Rishos? The answer is El Mid Itzrich O L'Rabas. L'rabos hatavas acherim, since the pasuk has lehara o lehetiv, the or, right? It's for the bad or the good, so that means, right, that you can do good for others. Lehara o lehetiv, to do, that's going to come to include, because it says lehara hetiv, that's to do bad for me. Hetev is to do good for me. What's O? O is coming to include another case. Well, that must mean to include the case of me doing good for somebody else. So therefore, there's no circumstance of me doing good for somebody else in the sense that other person there's a mitzvah involved in there. Shma mina b'davar harishus. So therefore, it must be that I'm just doing something nice for another person, right? I'm just doing a nice thing for another person. It's a davar rishus. And that's how I know the entire pasuk is talking about b'davar rishus ksiv. He's talking about that. Because if, let's say, it was talking about doing something nice for another person, that was a mitzvah like giving tzedakah. So ksiv, that's what it's talking about. Hashta haros acherim is Rabbi hatof aserchem miboy. It would say that you're not allowed to. Now that we know that somebody takes an oath in order to nullify a mitzvah, right? That we said, even in a circumstance which will hurt somebody else. So then if somebody swears to uphold a mitzvah which will benefit somebody else and he violates that, so for sure does the Torah have to tell me that I would be liable in that circumstance? Obviously the shvuah takes place. So therefore, why would I need, if in fact we were saying that that swearing to mitzvos counts, so then why would the word O help me out, teach me anything? I would have a mitzvah to do it. I obviously would have a prohibition already to not do it. The prohibition would be on me. So therefore, O wouldn't be including anything new, right? Because it would tell me I do a mitzvah. So then the shvuah counts, and then I don't do a mitzvah, I do an avera, then the shvuah does not count, then the shvuah also counts. So therefore, doing it to somebody else also, it applies in the same way. Nothing would be included. Therefore, O is coming to explain that something where has to be a case of reshus because there's no real good involved in doing a reshus act to somebody else, and a reshus negative act to somebody else doesn't exist.
All means or, right?
Or, yes, correct. And this is where we're going to explain that the word or, when you have hara o lehetev, the word or is extra. Because if the pasuk said hara u lehetev without the o, right, for good or for bad, the u and good and bad, and in that case it means and or. So therefore, there's no need for the word or. So the word or is extra to teach me an extra case. So it would be a positive, and it would be a negative, and then there would be some other circumstance. That must be a case of reshus. Then once we've discussed that the o means reshus, all the cases have to be reshus. Okay, so that's how we're learning this out. Now, the issue is v'hai o mibaylei lechalik. So he says, but 1 second though, that o is not extra. The whole way that this drush works is the word o is extra. Who says it's extra? Maybe o is coming to tell me that it could be one or the other, but doesn't have to be both, right? So lechalik lo tzarich kra. The answer is I don't need o in order to tell me that it's separate. I would never have thought that my oath has to have both elements of good and for bad. O always I don't need O, right? When I have two items listed next to each other in the Torah, always I'm presuming I don't need both, I need one or the other. So ha'nichel Rabbi Yonasan, that's fine according to Rabbi Yonasan, because he holds that way. When you say kabed es avicha v'esimecha, right? It doesn't mean that I need to honor both my father and mother in order to get the mitzvah. It means honor my father or my mother and I get a mitzvah. Okay? So
the extra chaf, does also refer to your oldest brother?
That's the S. That's the extra S, right? The extra S includes the older brother, right? But it doesn't say oh. That's my point. It doesn't say or, right? It just says this and this. El Rabbi Yoshaya, but according to Rabbi Yoshaya, my ikol amemer. According to Rabbi Yoshaya, he seems to imply you do need the word or. If you don't have the word or, you need to do both. Because Tanya, look what happens as it says in the Brisa. Ish ayisher yikalel es aviv ve'esimo. If a person curses his father and his mother, ainli ela aviv ve'imo. Aviv v'lo imo, imo v'lo aviv minayin. So that seems to imply, right, that you are only liable if you curse your father and your mother, chas v'shalom. But if one curses father or mother, so where would be the proof? Now, remember, that's only because it says aviv ve'imo, and there's no word o there. That's Rabbi Yoshaya's point. So therefore, you be chayev. So how do you know that? The answer is aviv ve'imo kilel, because the pasuk has to go back at the end and specify because you cursed your father and your mother. Aviv kilel, imo kilel, because therefore it's coming to tell me that it's the father and the mother he cursed. So therefore, div Rabbi Yoshaya. That's Rabbi Yoshaya answers. So Rabbi Yoshaya says that the word o is not necessary. That the word o, you need to basically add something in to explain carefully that it's one or the other, but not both. So Rabbi Yonasan says, Mashma shnehem ke'echad umashma echad b'fnei atzmo. Rabbi Yonasan says, I don't need the word o. Whenever you put two things next to each other and you put the word and in between in the Torah, it means both of them together you're liable, and each one separately you're liable. Ad sheyifrot lecha kasav yachdav, unless the Torah specifies that it means that the avera has to be done together. For example, right, that you're not allowed to plow an ox and a donkey, and it says together. Right? Where's my case? So does Rashi bring that pasuk? Right? Rashi does not bring that pasuk. But let's say that it says, but that's what it says in that pasuk. I would be able to quote it for you. I thought that here.
Yeah, they have here lo sacharosh.
That's a lo sacharosh.
Yeah, that's shor v'chamor.
Yachdav, right? So therefore, shor v'chamor, right? You're not allowed to plow shor v'chamor yachdav. The prohibition is only when you have an ox and a donkey together, not if you plow with an ox or with a donkey, right? Plow with an ox, you're fine. Plow with a donkey, you're fine. Right. Plow with an ox and a donkey together, that's when you violate the prohibition of plowing with the two animals together. Okay.
What's the problem with plowing two animals together?
That's one of the categories of kilayim. Kilayim is shatnez with clothing, wool and linen, and planting grapes and wheat together, and this last case of plowing the ox and the donkey together. And there's lots of different reasons why that's a bad thing. One is that an ox wears a yoke. because its neck is straight, and so you put the yoke on the back of the ox, whereas by a donkey, its head curves up. And in order to, you have what's called a horse collar, in order to be able to plow with a donkey, right? You put a hole, looks like a horseshoe, it's like a donut that goes over the head of the horse, right? That's how you plow with the horse. So if you put a yoke on top of the two animals together, that's going to be very uncomfortable for one of them. So you can't plow it that way. The other explanation is because oxes chew their cud and donkeys do not. Right. So therefore, donkey's plowing along, watching his friend next to him sitting there and eating the whole time. He's like, what's going on? Now they keep feeding him and nobody's feeding me. Right. And the donkey gets jealous, right? So therefore, that's your prohibition about plowing the two of those things together. So that's the logic behind plowing your field with your donkey and your ox. So you don't do that. Okay? But it's only both of them together because the pasuk says together. If it didn't say the word yachdov together, then it would be prohibited to do. Then I would have known each one separately. So therefore, when the pasuk says two items, each one is separate. So therefore, in our circumstance, where it says that you can't take an oath lahara o lehetev, I don't need the word o. Lahara lehetev would tell me it has to be an oath for positive and an oath for negative. O is extra. Since O is extra, O can teach me that it has to be a rishus. Okay, so that works nicely. So the answer is, though, afilu tamer Rabbi Yoshia. No, in this circumstance, it would go even according to Rabbi Yoshia, v'savar like Rabbi Akiva, because he holds like Rabbi Akiva, the darish ribuye umiyute, that he learns the concept of riboy umiyut, because he says lahara'u lehetev, right? That's the miyut, right? That's only going to exclude one type of oath. Remember that Rabbi Akiva, basically the way that he learned it was, general rule, you have to keep any oath that you speak. Lahara lehetev was the specific, and then any of the utterances of your lips afterwards. So since he learns ribuy umiyut, it comes to include any type of oath, not just the ones that are positive and negative, but also the ones that are rishus, and also the ones that are past tense. So therefore, that's how we come to include, according to Rabbi Yoshia, even the rishus oaths as well. So Imar bid shlama bidavar rishus ksiv mimait davar mitzvah. So I understand, according to this, Rabbi Akiva learned, right? The thing that I'm coming to, but his ribuy umiyut, the thing that he was coming to exclude was the oath for mitzvah, as he said, right? The oath for mitzvah was what was excluded. So he says, so I understand, right? Bidavar rishus ksiv, right? If this pasuk lahara letev is talking about an item of rishus, right? Then that means that what is he going to exclude? He's going to exclude the item that's mitzvah. If you're going to tell me the pasuk lahara lehetiv means a mitzvah, mimai kamamait. So then what are you going to come to exclude? Right? Because if the specific in itself is talking about a mitzvah, then you've got nothing to exclude. So therefore, that is you must interpret the pasuk lahara lehetiv as a rishus. Okay, so that whole back and forth comes out to a conclusion of something that we had already learned before, that the oath cannot be to do a mitzvah or to not do a mitzvah, right? Either of those. That's the short of it, the short version of the long. Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira said, Ma'im harishus, but Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, wait a second. If you swearing something that isn't a mitzvah I have to keep, shouldn't it make logical sense that swearing to do a mitzvah should be even more required to keep? So the Rabbanan said, what are you talking about? There has to be, remember, it has to be positive and negative. If you can't swear to not do the mitzvah, then you can't swear to do the mitzvah. So the Gemara says, Rabbanan shaper kamri later Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. The Rabbanan made a good point. That was a good answer to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. As much as it sounds logical that you should be able to include an oath on a mitzvah, there's a technical reason why I can't, and that makes sense. For Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira is going to say to you, Atu atavas achirim, lav alfagav delesa bichlal haras achirim. 1 second, says Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Look, I can take an oath to give somebody a present, which is do a nice thing for somebody else, even though I can't take an oath to do harm, to damage, right? I can't take an oath to break someone's bottle of wine. So therefore, where's the positive and negative there? You didn't require a positive and negative in that case. So V'Rabbi Rachmana. So when the Torah comes to include that case as when it comes to include that case. So Hachanami Bekiyom mitzvah. Same thing when it comes to keeping a mitzvah. Afagav b'leise bebitul mitzvah. Even though you don't have the opposite of not doing the mitzvah, Rabbi Rachmana, the Torah must be including it as well. The Rabbanan will say, no, Hasam Ise below Ativ. There is a negative corresponding. What are you talking about? You say the opposite of I will give a bottle of wine is not I will break a bottle of his wine. The opposite of I will give him a bottle of wine is I won't give him a bottle of wine. And you certainly can swear to not give him a bottle of wine. That's fine. So hachami issa below ekayim, but you can't ever have a circumstance where you swear to not put your tefillin on. That's not going to happen, right? So that's why it's different. Good. Okay. Says the next mission.
Yeah.
Shevuos shelo ochel kikar zu. Person takes an oath. I will not eat this loaf of bread. Shevuos shelo ochlena. Then he takes a second oath. I will not eat it. And Shevuos shelo ochlena. Then he takes a third oath. I will not eat it. So how many? If he eats the bread, how much is he? How many is liable for?
3.
The achla, then he eats it. Eno chayav ela achas. Only one.
Oh.
Why? Because it's not Isser Kolel, right? You're swearing on the same thing you already did, right? That's a good review question, right? Since it was already prohibited to eat the loaf of bread, so now I swear to eat the loaf of bread a second time. I swear to eat it a third time. It's not a new oath.
You still have the one.
You're only chayav one. That's exactly right. Zuhi Shevuos Bitoy. That's the rules, everybody, of Shevuos Bitoy. We've done so far. We did talk about Shevuos Bitoy a lot, but we did mention Shevuos Ha'idus that we've talked about briefly, and we also have Shevuos Shav Shechayav and Azur Makos Val Shigdos Karban Olav Yored. That's the case. All of these are circumstances. We've explained how Shevuos Bitoy works, and if you do it on purpose, you violate it on purpose, you get lashes. And if you do it b'shogeg, you bring korban olav yored. Shevuos shav, however, if you take the Shevuos shav, that was the case where we took something and we swore that which was clearly wrong, right? That was their Shevuos shav. Chayav and al zadon malchus. If you do it on purpose, you get malchus. Val shigagasa.
If you give a korban before you get malchus,
no. If you're mazed, you're chayav the malchus. You're not chayav a korban. You can't bring a korban and get out of your malchus, right? What you can do if you want to get out of your malchus is you run to Beis Din and you admit it. Right? If you're moda, right? Because a person can't make himself liable. If you testify about yourself, then they can't give you malchus. You can only get malchus if the witnesses testify about you. Right? So if you're looking for your way out, okay, so this is your way out.
you have to get root.
That's correct. You skip route. The answer is get to Beis Din fast and admit it. Okay? Fine. But in the case of a Shevuos shav, if you do it b'shogeg, you're patur. There's no korban olav yored in Shevuos shav. That makes the difference. Says the Gemara. Lama li lemisnei. Why is it that if you read this Mishnah, it has an interesting language? Shlo ochel. First you say, I will not eat. Then shvuah shlo ochleno. Then you say afterwards, I will not eat it. Meaning the loaf of bread. So what's the why does it change? Why doesn't it just say the same oath 3 times? Shlo ochel, shlo ochel, shlo ochel. The purpose of this is to teach me that if I'm repeating the same oath 3 times, I only am violating once. Why does it change the text slightly? The answer is hakamash malon taima. Therefore, because the reason is because the Mishnah is telling me that the reason I'm only liable once is da'amar shlo ochel v'hadamar shlo ochlena is because he first said I will not eat, which prohibits him to what? Eat a kazayas of the bread. Then he says I will not eat it, which prohibits eating from the entire loaf of bread. Okay, that means he's not liable until he eats the entire loaf. I will not eat this loaf of bread. So therefore, since he's already prohibited to eat even a kazayas, the second oath doesn't add anything. Because if he eats as soon as he eats a kazayas, he's violated the first oath. For sure, if he eats the whole thing, he's violated the first oath. That's why it's repetitive. Dilo mechayev. Ella chada, and he's only going to be liable 1. Aval, but the point of the Mishnah is that if you do the reverse, then there are 2 oaths. Because this is an Isser Kolel, right? Our old friend Isser Kolel. And it works like this. Shalo ochlena, if you swear first, I will not eat this whole challah. He's got a whole roll here. I will not eat it. Then he says, I will not eat. Now the first time, it includes the whole, I'm only liable if I eat the whole loaf. The second oath says, I'm liable as soon as I eat a little bit, a kazayas. That means that the second oath is prohibiting it more, is increasing the prohibition over the first oath. And that concept, we said, works. And so therefore, Mechayev Tarti, if you eat the whole loaf, you're liable to 2. You'd be liable for the first one as soon as you eat the kazayas, and then if you continue eating the whole loaf, you're liable 2. That is Kedarava. Like Rava says. Rava said, Shevuos shelo ochel kikar zu. Right? If a person says, I will not eat this loaf, kevan she'achol mimena kazayas, once he eats a kazayas of it, chayiv, he's liable. Shelo ochlen, no, but if he says, I will not eat it, the whole loaf, eno chayiv at she'ochel kula, he's not liable unless he eats the entire thing. Okay, so that's the distinction. That's why our Mishnah uses the 2 in order to tell me that in the case the Mishnah gives, where he says, I will not eat even a kazayas, and then he adds on, I will not eat the whole loaf, that's when you're only liable 1, because the second oath is less severe than the first one. But if it was the other way around, the first oath was less severe than the second one, then the second oath would have an impact. Good, next.
If the second one was more severe?
Yes, because by eating less, I'm liable faster, right?
Or
So
if you said like, you make a sure that you're gonna eat a little, you're gonna eat like not the whole thing.
right, that would work. Right? Just like I have a whole loaf. I go I'm first Shevuos, I won't eat the whole loaf. Then the second Shevuos, I'm not going to eat half the loaf. And the third, I'm not even going to eat a kazayas. Then he eats the whole thing. He's liable for all 3.
So the second Shevuos that he makes is say I'm not going to eat it at all. So retroactively,
because it adds on right to the first. If the first oath included what is included already in the second oath. If whatever's in the first oath, in the second oath, already was included by the first oath, then the second oath doesn't count. But if the second oath adds something new, then it can work and it can be effective. So you can be liable for both. Right? So that's the point.
Be careful with your oaths.
Yes. Dali neder. Okay. Shavua shelo ochlena ve'ochla. Person makes a shvua that he will not eat it, and then he eats it. Eno chai velachas, he's only liable once. So hatu lamali. So okay, I got it. That was the point, right? If I swore that I was going to eat a kazayas, then I swear afterwards and eat the whole loaf, then I'm going to be liable only 1. Why do I have to bring up a third oath? Why do you have to this is like overkill? And also, I'm not going to eat it again. It's still liable 1. Fine, just why? So hakamash malon. This is coming to tell me chiyuvahu deleka hashvu ikka. It's coming to tell me that you're not liable, but the oath exists. What does that mean? So, de'imishkachas ravcha chayla, because if space exists, the new oath will fill it. What does that mean? Lamai hilchasa. What is practical halacha? What does that mean? I've got a new oath. I swore I won't eat it, and now you're telling me that the second oath exists. It just can't take place on the loaf of bread because the first oath already encompassed the loaf of bread. So what's the point of the second oath then? So the answer is likid de Rava. The point is like what Rava says. Dama Rava says, She'im nish'al hal rishona. Let's say a person goes to a chacham. He goes to a tzaddik and he says, right, that I feel badly about the oath that I took and I'd like to have my oath removed, right?
Revoked.
So then he gets it revoked, right? Also, lo shnia tachteha, the second oath takes the place of the first one. You hear what I'm saying? In other words, first oath, I will not eat the loaf of bread, right? I won't eat the loaf of bread. Then he takes another oath, I will not eat a loaf of bread. Then he goes to the chacham and he says, if I had known that the loaf of bread was going to be like poppy seeds, then I wouldn't have taken that oath, right? And the chacham goes, oh, you're right, okay. That first oath is off the hook. Can I eat the loaf now? No, you can't, because you still have the second oath. So the second oath didn't take hold of anything, but now that the first oath is gone, the second oath falls in. Okay. Lema misa yeyale. So you have to hang on. If you're jumping in this year, you got to hold your questions. Okay? Got to hold your questions. Because we were in the middle the whole time. So, lema misa yeyale. Let's say this supports it. Misha nadar beis naziros. Let's say somebody takes a hold, he makes 2 oaths of nazirus. He goes, Nazir first time, I'm going to be a Nazir. Then he says, you know what? I love being a Nazir so much, I'll do it again. right? Now he's going to do Nazir after Nazir. Umana Rishona, and then he does the first set of Nazirus, 30 days in. And then, Ve'efir Shaleh Korban, he's ready to finish his Nazirus. So what does he do? He gets his Korban ready to go. V'yachar kach, then he goes, you know what? I regret becoming a Nazir. And he goes to a Chacham in order to ask a Shaila to have his Nazirus revoked. Okay? What happens? Nishal Rishona, he asks the Chacham, can I get my first Nazirus revoked? All solo Shnia. And the Chacham says, yeah, you're right, your first Nazirus is revoked. What happens? Then his second Naziros is considered to have taken effect. So he just did 30 days. Since the first Naziros is gone, now the 30 days he just did counts as his second Naziros. Okay? You write your questions down. I'll answer them at the end.
Nothing would have changed.
Huh?
Nothing would have changed. You already went through it. He already went.
Right, but the Chiddush is right. This is the point. Since you say, but he didn't intend to do his second Naziros. He was intending to do the first Naziros. Right. But the answer is same thing as the oath on the loaf of bread. Since the first oath is removed, the second oath falls in place. Since the first Naziros is removed, the second Naziros fell in its place, and now he's done with his second Naziros. Right.
Yeah.
So, right. So also lo shniya barishona, his second Naziros counts as his first. So hachi hashta. 1 second. How does that work? How can you compare the two cases of the case of Naziros and the case of the roll? Hasam Naziros miha isa. There, by the Naziros, what happened? If I take a Naziros and then I take a second Naziros, and a Naziros is 30 days. So how many days do I have to be a Nazir? 60 days, right. I got a first Naziros, and then I got a second Naziros. Okay? But, so money Rishona, boy mihadar mimna l'shniya. When he finishes counting his first Naziros, he's got to come back and do the second one. Below she'ela, without it, if he doesn't ask. Hacha, but here, by the loaf of bread, Shevuos shniya, means the loaf of bread, the second oath has no validity at all. If he doesn't ask a Shaila about this loaf of bread to get rid of the first Shavua, the second Shavua has absolutely zero meaning. So you can't really compare the two cases. Because at least by the Nazir, the second Nazir existed. It just gets pushed back, right? It's like when you delete a cell in Excel and it's shift cells left. It just moves everything over, right? But it doesn't work that way when it comes to the loaf, because the second oath didn't exist on anything. Right. Okay.
Right.
Amar Rava.
The second Shavua on the oath.
Yeah, you got a whole question. You can't jump in the chair at the end and because you probably missed the answers. Hang on, okay? So hang on. Amar Rava says, Nishba kikar, person takes an oath on a loaf of bread, v'achla, and then he eats it. Im shir mimena kazayis, if he leaves over a kazayis that he didn't eat, nish al aleha, he can go to the chacham, right? He's already violated his oath, right? His oath was, I won't eat the loaf of bread. But then he eats it, but he leaves over a kazayas. The kazayas is enough that if he eats that kazayas, he would be liable also, right? But he's already liable. He goes to a chacham and he asks, can I nullify my vow? And the chacham says yes. So then his oath is retroactively revoked, and he doesn't have to bring a korban for the party eight.
You shouldn't even go to the base and get it revoked, not the chacham on its own.
No, chacham is on his own. The chacham is enough. You don't need a base to nullify an oath, right? So now, achla kula, if you eat the entire loaf, you don't leave over kazayas, ain nishala, then you can't ask a chacham. Now it's too late, right? So Amarle Ravacha, braid the Rava Ravashi, Ravacha, the son of Rava, says to Ravashi, hey Chidami, what's going on here? Idamar, what was the oath originally? Because they're trying to figure out why does leaving over a kazayas at the end make any practical difference? He already ate. So, Idamar Shalocha Mikazayas, if he says Mikazayas Kama, if his oath was, I won't eat even the first kazayas. So Avdei Liri Sureh. So what difference does he make if he left over a kazayas at the end? He already violated the Isser. What gives him the right to go to a chacham and retroactively allow him to eat the loaf, and now he's not liable to an avera that he did? So Ida Amar Shaloach Lena, and if the oath that he said was, I won't eat the entire loaf, so my Irya Kazayas, why does he have to leave over a Kazayas? Chav Chesam and Aleph, Afilu Kol Shunami. Even if he leaves over less than a Kazayas, because he didn't eat the whole loaf, so he just has to leave over a little drop. So the answer is, Ibais Emeshlo Ochel, Ibais Emeshlo Ochel, and I can answer that either way. I can answer either that he said I won't eat even a Kazayas, or it could even be if I won't eat the entire thing. Ibais Emeshlo Ochel, if it was a circumstance where he said I won't eat it, I won't eat at all, Migo de Mahanyale She'ela Kazayas, look, he's got a Kazayas left. That kazayas by itself would be a violation of the Isser. Since he has enough of the food left to violate the Isser, he has enough to go ask a Shiloh on. And once he asks a Shiloh on that kazayas, can this kazayas become permitted to me? So then, since since that question to ask a chacham will benefit him so that he can now have this last piece, it's going to go back retroactively and help the one that he already ate. Right? He's just got to have a piece of a kazayis left to be able to ask a question on. Once he's got a piece left, then he can go back and retroactively be allowed to eat everything from before. Or else, if you want, I will say shelo ochlena, that I won't eat it at all. I won't eat the entire thing. So ishir kazayis, if he leaves over a kazayis, chashiv lishtule, then he's got enough left to be able to ask and get that vow removed. Low, but if not, lo choshev le'it shule ole. Then he's eaten so much of it that it doesn't make any sense to ask at this point. Then basically the whole roll is gone. So that's not going to be enough. Meisvei. Okay, keep moving. So Meisvei asks the following question: Mi should nadar shtei naziros. Somebody takes an oath of 2 naziros. Umana rishona, and he counts his way through 30 days through the first one. Vehifrish alel korban. He separates out the korban. V'achar kach nishal ala rishona, and then afterwards he asks and gets the first Nazirus revoked. Also, lo shnia berishona, the second Nazirus counts in the place of the first. So, hachabamayas. So the question is, how does that work? His korban essentially has turned. He's done a korban, and his korban now is retroactively working for a second Nazirus, even though he brought it for his first Nazirus. That's the same thing as retroactively the part that he ate. We said once he ate the whole loaf, he can't now retroactively annul the vow. It's too late. Why is it that now that the Nazirus is gone, he's already done the kapara, he's already done the korban, how's he going to go back and retroactively annul a Nazirus that already finished? That shouldn't work. So the answer is Hachabamayaskin. Why is that permitted? Beshalo kiper. He didn't do his atonement yet. He didn't bring the korban yet. He separated the animal. He didn't do it. So therefore the Nazirus is still in effect. That's why he can ask about it. V'atanya, we learn in a brisa though, kiper, he did bring his atonement already. So the answer is B'shlo Gilach. You're right, he brought his atonement, but he didn't shave his head yet. Shave his head is part of the end of the Nazir's process. And if he hasn't done that, the Nazirus is not over. If the Nazirus is not over, he can ask a chacham and he can get it removed. For Rabbi Elazar, in this Rabbi Elazar's opinion, Da'amar, who holds tiglachas me'akva, that the shaving of the head is a critical component of the service of Nazirus, and being a Nazir is not over until you do that at the end. Ve'ha Tanya, but we learned in a brisa, galach, right, that he did already shave his head. So then what are you going to say? He already brought the atonement, he already shaved his head. How can he get the Nazirus annulled? So Amar Ravashi says, Nazirus karamis. He says, one second, you're going to question how Nazirus works? Nazirus is different. Mi garam l'shniya shelo tachol rishona shelo tachol. What is it that made it so that the second Nazirus wouldn't start? In other words, the Nazir for second Nazirus would just start. Why didn't it just start? The answer is because you're still doing the first Nazirus. So, therefore, ve'ena. So now, if the chacham can remove the second one, then can remove the first one, then the second one does fall. So that's why it can be effective. That's why it can be effective. It's a different story. In other words, one is just holding back the other one, and when you can remove and say that this was no longer in the way, the second one can fall. A Meimar says, no. Afilu achla kula, he says a Meimar, back to the roll. Even if you ate the entire thing, you can still go back to a chacham and have it removed, have the oath removed. Nisha Allah, so afilu achla kula nishal, you can still ask. I b'shogeg mechusar korban, I b'mezid mechusar malchus. Right? So he says, if you do it b'shogeg, so then you are going to be asking to not bring the korban, right? So that's why you're asking, right? In order to be, you're asking, even though there's no loaf of bread, there's no bread left, you're asking to not bring the korban. And as far as b'mezid, you're asking it in order so that you are missing malchus. So you're basically asking in order to be removed of malchus. Aval, however, kaftu ala amud, right? Once you are already tied to the post to get malchus, then you can no longer ask anymore. And that's Kiddush Shmuel. That's like Shmuel said. The Amar Shmuel said, Kaftu ala amud, back in Maseches Makos, we learned that once they tie you to the post, veratz mi beistin, and you run away from beistin before they give you lashes, pater, you're exempt. So therefore, once you got tied to the post, you can no longer ask to have your oath revoked that you violated, because it's already too late to get the malchus revoked because you've already basically had your malchus fulfilled by getting tied to the pole. Velohi, but that's a mistake. Because if you remember back in Makos, it wasn't the fact that he was tied to the post that made him no longer liable to the malchus. Hasam Ratz, he had to run away. Right? It was the fact that he ran away, and Hachal Ratz, here he did not. So therefore, since he didn't run away, he still could theoretically ask and have his malchus removed. Amar Rava. Rava says, Shevuos shelo ochel kikar zu. If somebody takes an oath that I will not eat this loaf of bread. Im ochel zu. If I do eat this one. We have what's called a conditional loaf, and then we have the prohibited loaf. Right? The conditional loaf is, if I eat this loaf, that's the if, that's this loaf, then I will activate the prohibition to eat that loaf. Okay? Loaf A, we'll call that the conditional loaf, and loaf B, we'll call that the prohibited loaf. Okay? So, the achal rishona, he eats the conditional loaf, and now thereby activates the prohibition, b'shogeg, but he ate the first one, b'shogeg, v'ashniya b'mezid. Now, so that basically means that he activated the oath in a shogeg manner. Well, the problem that we have is that we had a pasuk that said that a person could not take a shvuah negligently or mistakenly. That we call that a person has to be, a human being has to be in his right mind to take an oath. So therefore, if the oath became established through the unintentional eating of the conditional loaf, even if he eats the second loaf on purpose, he's patur. He does not get punished for it. However, Rishona b'mezid, if he eats the conditional loaf on purpose, vashniya b'shogeg, and eats the second one b'shogeg, then the conditional loaf activates the prohibition, and once the prohibition is activated, when he eats the second one b'shogeg, he's chayev, he brings a korban. Shteyen b'shogeg, if he eats both of them b'shogeg, obviously he's exempt, patur, because once again, as long as you eat the first one b'shogeg, you're not going to be liable to any punishment because you activated it in the case of shogeg. Chav chas amabes. Shteyen b'mezid, if you do both of them on purpose, so then achlei litnae v'hadar achlei lisurei. So then he's eaten the conditional loaf, and then afterwards he's eaten it depends on what order he's doing it, right? Now he's done both of them on purpose. If he ate the conditional loaf first, then he's activated the prohibition. By activating the prohibition, then he intentionally eats the second loaf. That means he's intentionally violating the prohibition, so then he's mechayev. Now he's chayev malchus. However, let's say he didn't eat the conditional loaf first. Let's say he ate the prohibited loaf first. Then he eats the conditional loaf. The prohibition is then retroactively established, right? Because now I eat this loaf, and then by saying, if I eat that loaf, then the one I already ate is going to be prohibited. So now, plukta de Rabbi Yochanan of Reish Lakish, this is a review point. This is the old argument we had between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Because, Laman Damar Hasra Safek, Shema Hasra, according to Reish Lakish, we have such a thing as Hasra Safek. Right? So, Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is one who holds of something called Asra Safek. Asra Safek is when I warn you that you may violate an Avera. Because when did I have to warn the person? Before he eats the prohibited item. Well, the point is he ate the prohibited item. He hadn't yet ate the conditional item. So we don't know that what you're going to eat on condition is going to be prohibited yet. Because you haven't done it yet. So therefore, I'm warning you, don't eat that, because if you eat that, you might be violating prohibition later on. Well, that, according to Rabbi Yochanan, works. But according to Reish Lakish, right, who says, Laman damar lav shma hasra, potter. If the one who says that you are, that's not considered a valid warning, then that's not going to be valid. So we'll have to... So we're going to stop here by unzuv bazu. That'll be the next case. Let's say we basically establish each one as a condition on the other one, then change.